Thanks for joining us. We see some attendees populating. As you join us, we just ask that in the chat you can put your name and tell us how you're participating in the webinar today, whether it's a phone, computer, iPad, or tablet. Hi everyone, thanks for joining us. We'll wait a moment before we get started. You can let us know your name and how you're joining us today. iPhone, tablet, computer. Just let us know in the chat. So you have Tucson, Charlotte, Milwaukee. It looks like most people are choosing to be on computers today, which is great. Rachel, all the way from Switzerland. Nice to have you. It's awesome to see people from all over the country and the world. Great, so if you're here, you should be seeing a screen share of a Google slide that says setup. And we just ask that you take a moment to open up 3 different web pages in your browser, internet browser, if you can. One of them will be a PDF to the curriculum that we'll be talking about today. One will be to the supplemental worksheets. And one link is to the editable Google Slides. So today we're going to ask you to participate in making some shared resources, which would be our Google Slides today. And Sarah's going to put those in the chat. You can either click on the link in the slide, or you should be able to locate the documents in the chat box. And if you're having problems, you can just let us know in the chat and Sarah is here to help you out. We'll just wait one more moment before we get started. Yeah, awesome. We're so happy to have you guys here today. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. We'll have time to revisit the setup before we get working on the different documents. So don't feel pressured if you're not ready yet. That's okay. So we're happy to see that everyone's joining from a computer. I think that'll make it easier for participants to edit the Google Docs and to work together collaboratively, which is one of our goals today. So I just want to go over some of the webinar features that we have in store. So of course, we're going to be using the Zoom chat box. You guys are all used it looks like. We're going to ask you to edit slides today. And we're going to ask a few poll questions just to get information about what you need to do your job better or to be more successful and creative in your transition to virtual learning. And to make that easier for you, we've created some icons. So we have a little chat icon and we have a pencil icon. So when you see the chat box, we like you to put your answers in the chat. And when you see a pencil, that means your job is to edit the slide. If you have any questions about those things or don't know where to go, you can always ask Sarah. And before we go any further, I want to introduce myself. My name is Lindsay. I'm the Climate Change Education Manager at Climate Generation.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Megan Van Lowe, and I'm the education coordinator, and we'll be helping kind of go through the curriculum with you all today as well.
Hey everyone, this is Sarah Goodspeed. I'm the Youth and Policy Manager at Climate Generation and will be helping with tech support. So send me a chat for anyone who needs some help.
Great, thanks guys. So I'll tell you a little bit about Climate Generation. We're founded by Will Steger, and we empower individuals and their communities to engage in solutions to climate change. And specifically, we work with youth, educators, public audiences, and influentials or thought leaders in their communities to engage in climate conversations and solutions. Our education team provides professional development opportunities like this. We also create resources and curricula, and we also provide community networking events. So we have a curriculum suite that's hosted online. It's featured in the slides now. And we'll be working through one of those curriculum today, which is called Next Generation Climate. All of these curricular resources are freely available to download on our website, which you'll see today. And before we go on, we want to acknowledge why we're all here on Zoom, which is, of course, coronavirus and our response to this current pandemic. And we understand that you guys are going through a lot of changes. Our work is also changing very dramatically. And we just want you to know that we're inspired by you and inspired by your hard work and dedication to support your students. And we, in turn, want to support you. So today, we hope that we can provide some sparks of creativity, maybe create some curiosity in trying new things, and then provide resources to help you in this transition. And first and foremost, we want you to know that you don't have to be perfect in this transition, and we want you to take care of yourself and your community and your neighbors, as well as other educators. So we have, luckily we have this image that was created by our friend Lisa Troutman about how to survive social isolation. And this is advice from Will Steger, our founder. So we think you can take some of these home with you today. All right, so our goals today are, of course, to go over the Next Generation Climate curriculum. And how we're going to do that is Megan and I will go through 6 lessons. Each lesson will have a brief introduction. We'll go through an interactive example or provide documents to create a virtual adaptation for that lesson. And we'll also link you to some supporting virtual resources from our partners. And we'll do a bit of reflection. So if you have any questions at this point, you can put them in the chat. And otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Megan to give us an overview of Next Generation Climate.
Great. So the Next Generation Climate curriculum is a curriculum that was written in 2015. Do you want to click on that next slide?
Yeah, thanks.
Great, thanks. So it was written in-house at Climate Generation. It's one of many in our suite that Lindsay had touched on a little bit earlier. But we chose this one because we think it's a really good kind of basic climate change 101 that is written for middle school but can be adapted for lower or higher levels of learning. And we think it actually is really a good one to do virtually, knowing that a lot of learning is virtual and digital right now. So kind of trying to put a resource in your hands that you can use immediately if that works with your lesson plans. So it was written in 2015, but revised in 2019. So it has some updated graphs, which is good because the science is ever changing. It's written to support the Next Generation Science Standards, or NGSS. So if you're in a state that has NGSS, this is a really good curriculum to support that, as well as the new Minnesota State Science Standards that are coming out because they are very similar to NGSS. It involves graph interpretation, looking at evidence, making claims, and just really solidifying answers to questions around anthropogenic climate change. So each lesson has a question, an inquiry, that we are trying to answer through the activities. So some of the questions are, why are temperatures increasing globally? how are humans influencing this? What are the impacts and what can we do? So again, just a really good kind of like climate 101. So again, the 6 lessons, we're gonna just highlight one activity. Either we're going to either show you and interact with you to do the activity, or we'll just kind of highlight it and talk through it with you today. Just to give you a little bit of an overview and an overall idea of how the curriculum is laid out. So we know that this, we're going to be doing this in about an hour today. This curriculum is meant to be obviously over days, weeks, months. You can definitely choose activities that stand alone, just do one of the lessons. Knowing that the learning and teaching that you're doing right now is synchronous and asynchronous. Maybe you're not even able to meet with your students face-to-face. It's all just sending emails or information. So just knowing that, feel free to adapt anything that you see today. We just wanted to give you a bit of a variety. You wanted to chat about this part, Lindsay, with the online connections, or I can?
If you want to go ahead and just finish out the overview, and then I can move on to the first activity.
Great. So yeah, with the curriculum, you should have received the link to the PDF itself. So that is the curriculum itself that you as a teacher would use. Then we have these online connections. So that's also a link in the chat and in the slides, where we chose this curriculum because the online connections are just right there for you. So if you go to our website and the online connections, all of the worksheets and the graphs are linked right there, and it shows each lesson. So really straightforward. That area is probably a good place for your students to access the graphs and the worksheets, and then you can have the curriculum as the teacher.
Great. Megan, we had a related question. I don't know if you could answer right now. Someone had asked, or Betsy had asked, the link for the curriculum says it's 2017, but we had said it was updated maybe after that. Is that the most recent link?
Oh, that's a good question. Let's see.
We can double check for you.
If it says 2017, it probably is 2017 and not 2019. So
we'll work through that for today, and then in the follow-up email, we'll make sure that we have the most recent version for you.
Yeah, good catch. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Betsy. All right. So just before we get started, I wanted to make sure that everyone has access to the 3 resources we'll be working with today. So you should have a link to a PDF for the curriculum. So I'm going to change my browser to that to show you that now. You should also have a link and have open the worksheets page. And also a link to the slides, the editable slides, because that's where you'll be sharing your thoughts today with us. And we're going to go ahead and get started with activity 1. And if you do have questions along the way, don't forget Sarah's here to help you out. Okay, so in question 1, we're looking at, or excuse me, in lesson 1, we're looking at the question, what's happening to global temperature? In this lesson, students are introduced to evidence that shows there's been a rise in global temperature over the past century, and they're asked to make their own conclusions using evidence. So in this lesson, we provide students with global land and ocean temperature anomalies graphs. We have worksheets to support that, and we also have activities. So right now, I'd like you to navigate to the worksheets section and go to lesson 1. And you should be able to open the global land and oceans temp anomalies graph. Anomalies, it's a hard word to say. And I'm just gonna make my view a little better here for you guys. So in here, you're gonna do a little bit of individual work, but I wanna give you some setup first. So a temperature anomaly, how do you say that? Sarah, you're laughing at me. Anomaly, there we go. It means a departure from a long-term average. So if you take an individual measurement, how much difference is there between the average? And on these graphs, if you see a blue bar, it means that there is a temperature change that was cooler than the average. And a red bar means that you're seeing a temperature change that's warmer than an average. So as we're going to take 3 minutes to do some individual work today, and this can be structured in any way for your students. This is just how we've chosen to do this for you. And what we want you to do is pick one graph. So in the worksheets document, pick one graph, preferably not the first one, but either plot on page 7 and on, and investigate that graph a little bit. So ask some clarifying questions. We want you to try to figure out who collected the data, what are the x-axes, when was the data collected, and what does this data represent? And we want you to reflect on these for about 3 minutes, and we're going to come together as a group to share our ideas. And Sarah has posted those questions for us into the chat box. And if you come up with things, you can put them into the Post-it notes on the next slide. That's called What Came Up in Your Investigation. So someone might have asked, what's the temperature anomaly? Great, we see some questions populating in our Post-it notes. Feel free to grab from the pile on the left and just add away. We'll take about another minute. Some really great questions in here. How does temperature and carbon dioxide dovetail? What's the uncertainty in the data? Why does data start at 1880 when the graph average starts at 1901? Yeah. Why was there a peak at 1945? Great. So you can continue to put those questions in there. I'm just going to move forward since we don't have too much time to spend on each one of these lessons. So something that you might have noticed in the PDF document for these graphs is that there's multiple sections to a graph, and they're all showing something slightly different. And some of your questions get to this about what is the pattern that we're seeing? Why are we only seeing a portion of this graph? How do these graphs fit together? And what are they telling us about climate change? And I don't want to spend too much time going into that. Rather, I'd like to continue with our investigation on our next slide by asking you to brainstorm about how do these pieces of graph fit together, okay? So each portion, we have 5 portions of our graph, and I've labeled them each with a letter. And I want you to try to piece them together. And in the chat box, tell me what order these plots go in. to make one full picture of global climate change. For example, it might be ADCFB or something like that. Great. Starting to see some answers in the chat. And as they come in, I want you guys to look at your partners or other educators and see if you're getting the same answer or if you're getting different answers. Looks like the first few are the same. Great. So quite a few of you think that the graph starts with section B or section D, and I just want to look at both of these with you guys, and let's brainstorm about how they're the same and how they're different. So here's the two sections you have suggested go first. And you know, if I was going to do this and my thought process, what I would look at is maybe the variable that's sequential in this plot, which is time. So I know that generally a plot goes from lowest number to highest number on an x-axis. So that might be how I decide which one goes first. And this B plot starts with 1880. So I'm actually going to move this here. And D is next, because it goes from 1906 in B to 1907 in D. And then if I just go based on color patterns, I might say there's a little purple in this one, and I might rearrange it. And you guys can see, compare your answers to mine here. And I hope that this is just an example of how you might interact with your students and help them brainstorm some of these problems and how they can fit things together. So we'll just go on to the full graph here in the next slide. What's happening to global temperature? And this is what the full slide looks like together. And hopefully, as your students get to investigate these portions of a graph, they'll see that every section, every time period looks different. And to figure out what a global pattern is, we need to look at the whole picture here. And as you can see in this picture, we can see a change from cooler temperatures to higher temperatures across time. And if you just follow me along to the next slide, we can also see a couple other examples of global temperature change patterns. And what happens when you look at small chunks, you get a different picture of this pattern. And it's, again, really important to look at the whole thing. And NASA actually has an interactive simulation of this exact data where students can zoom in on certain parts of the plot. And you might be able to use this as an asynchronous way to get them engaged in this data. Great. I know that was fast, but we're going to move ahead. So I just want to, while we're making a transition to the next lesson, just do a little bit of reflection about how you're feeling about teaching online. So in this plot, you can actually, or excuse me, in this slide, you can move a little red circle to indicate how you're feeling. Like, I'm not feeling very confident, actually. And then you can share with us in the chat how you're feeling. And then Megan's going to take over in the next lesson. Oh, great. A lot of confidence. It's awesome.
I like that. Somebody said, learning as we go.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
Right in the upper bracket. And a few of these, excuse me, slides are actually templates from Training for Change. So they are an organization that does online virtual facilitation. So that's where we got these ideas of these, corners of icons that you then have people drag in as a way to interact. Great. Well, that's good to see. A few folks not confident, but majority up there. So obviously this just takes practice, more time. getting more confident with any new thing. Confidence in leading, but how much will students learn? Very good question. I think gauging learning while it's virtual is really difficult to assess. All right. Well, thanks for showing how you're feeling about that. We'll jump into the next activity of lesson 1. So if you want to jump to the next slide, this activity is looking at evidence for the rising global temperature. So we saw that temperatures are rising globally through that graph. So besides looking at temperature, a question I want to pose to you all to start off this activity is, without looking at a thermometer, what are things that you could see, hear, or smell that indicate changes in temperature? So on the next slide, we have some chat bubbles that I would love folks just to throw in some answers there to this question. So besides looking at a thermometer, what are some things that you can see, hear, and smell that indicate change? Great. Filling them in. So it looks like we have flowers blooming, appearance of red-winged blackbirds, plant growth, lack of snow in winter, when you can see your breath, like that. No frost in April in 1,300 meters in Switzerland. Wow. So elevation differences, precipitation, more or fewer insects. Yeah, these are all really great. So clearly we can see evidence for climate change happening, where we live, or when we read about it, or when scientists have recorded it and tell us. So thinking of these impacts and evidence, we have some graphs or figures that we would like you all to look at right now for this next activity. So if you want to go again to the online worksheets and go to the temperature indicators figure set, again under lesson 1. And basically the next 4 links there in lesson 1 are going to be for this activity. So if you would just like to open up that figure set and just pick a figure that looks good to you and go ahead and do some analysis of it. And so I think there's like 10 to 12 figures there. So you can look at 1, you could look at 2. You can always rotate it as well in your view if that's helpful to see it horizontal.
I'm going to try to do that now if it works.
And then along with these figures, if you're just kind of analyzing them yourself, there is a worksheet that goes along with it as well there online. So you could click on the worksheet. Scroll
Which
up
that one's called, Megan?
Yep, lesson 1 worksheet there. So this is a worksheet you could hand to your students, assign them a figure or 2 to look at, and this could be homework. This could be something they work on individually during a time when you're not fully connected, that gets them to analyze a figure, ask clarifying questions, kind of interpret what's happening. And then you could bring them back large group and have a discussion on it, or do one, or maybe even do one together. So I'm just going to give you about 2 minutes to analyze a figure, maybe look at the questions on the worksheet or in the slides to figure out what evidence do we have presented here.
Great. I'm going to go ahead and close some of these browsers.
And once you've started kind of looking at your figures and you're getting a handle on what it's trying to tell us, if you could click on slide number 20 that says conclusion, go ahead and pick a post-it note and maybe write your answers to some of these questions if you're able to look at more than one figure or different things from what you're able to analyze. Go ahead and throw some answers either in there or in the chat, and Sarah can throw them in there as well if it's hard to figure that out. And if you agree with something someone has written on a post-it note, there's a star cache on the bottom left, and you can pull a star out and go ahead and star someone else's comment. So we'll give a few more minutes to have you guys look at your figures, the worksheet, and this slide.
And you should be able to group a star with a post-it note if you feel like it. So when we move those post-it notes, they can move together. And feel free to edit the size of the post-it notes if you are having trouble fitting all of your ideas on one. It's fine. It's so fun to see all of the ideas populate.
Yeah.
Makes me excited.
All right, folks are filling them in. So maybe we'll just kind of chat here about what we're seeing. So this evidence from these figures, some of them might be showing climate data, others might just be showing weather data, right? So how can we determine if this is, you know, a grouping from something that's long enough time for us to claim that it is, in fact, climate change? Or is it something that's just changing due to something else? But I think the larger picture that we want to show here with all of these evidence lines is that we can put all the different lines of evidence. So cherry blossoms timing, or increased wildfires, or loss of ice on lakes, or glaciers receding. All of these things, when put together, paint a bigger conclusion for the evidence for global temperature rise and climate change. So we know that this is not the full picture either. What data is missing? What would you like to know? Obviously is a huge part of this activity. One of them, how to correlate data locally to make it hit home more. For sure, we know that with climate change education, understanding what's happening in our own backyard makes it way more relevant for students learning. One is showing we can study it alongside historical events, legislations, and regulations. Yep, that's a good one. Many sources of data showing similar trends. Right, so then thinking of good clarifying questions, you know, who collected this data? A lot of these figures are from different organizations, and they're all kind of painting the same picture, telling the same story. So understanding the sources of the information, all of that is good. Provides a more holistic picture of evidence. Yeah. Great. Well, that is just activity 2 from lesson 1, showing that we can have evidence for global temperature rise.
Great.
Thanks for
Thanks,
participating.
Megan. I'll go ahead and take up on, or start on lesson 2 here. So those first 2 lessons, or first 2 activities, we spent a lot of time going more in depth with how you might do your adaptation yourself. And the next few, we generally more talk about what we might do and talk more about ideas for asynchronous education. So here, that was a lot of synchronous work. We would expect students to be participating together to see one another's ideas. But then, we need to think about, like, we can't ask them to be on the computer for 8 hours a day. So what do we do in that case? So in lesson 2, our question is, what factors have caused the rise in global temperature over the last century? And in this lesson, students learn about the factors that are causing the climate to change. And one of the main factors that have caused an increase in global temperature is the greenhouse effect and greenhouse gases. So in this, in this activity, you can always start with a really great video from different resources. I'm not going to play this one today since we're having to move pretty fast through these things, but you can access this video from ACE, and it's a cartoon about greenhouse gases. And in our worksheets, if you want to navigate over to that tab for lesson 2, we have a bunch of resources for asynchronous engagement with this activity. So we have evidence figure sets again, we have the figure set descriptions, and we have worksheets that can be associated with this activity. And then coming back at the end, we actually have a human and natural influences graph where students can start to pick apart natural patterns in climate change versus human-induced patterns of climate change. So that's really important to consider, especially with the connection to greenhouse gases and our contribution through industry or other types of systems that we've created. If anyone has any questions about that activity, feel free to put them in the chat. Otherwise, I'm just going to move forward. And I'm going to ask you guys to do a bit of reflection now that you've engaged in some of these activities. On slide 22, we asked what issues might arise when leading activities online. Had a couple come up already, like I can't move my dot on the line. Also, we were concerned about folks that might need to engage in this from a phone. How do they do that? And we do know that educators are really concerned about lack of participation and engagement from their students. And that can be from all types of things. And we recognize that that's really hard, and we're not really addressing that today. Yeah, so I see one here that's struggling to interpret graphs. I see that happening probably with a lot of different things and not just graphs. Like, how do we do this difficult work when we're away from our students? I think it's very hard. And maybe thinking about how do we integrate asynchronous learning and synchronous learning to support that and to address the same questions in many different ways, and that might help. So those interactive simulations and then guided reflection about how to interpret a graph through something like this might help. Yeah, there are a lot of these like connectivity issues with Wi-Fi, super difficult problem. Yeah, I think it's something we just need to ask and work around. Yeah, not having, or lack of equity in terms of just quiet learning space. Yep. Students feeling stressed and overwhelmed and not having the patience right now. I get that. We went through that right now, developing this program. It's happening for everyone. You know, some of the things I've heard teachers are doing are lightening the load a little bit, in sense of maybe not giving as many different topics. So thinking about going deeper into one topic rather than addressing many, many topics, to give that time and reflection that's necessary right now. Great. Thanks for all your ideas. I'm going to shoot it back over to Megan to talk about lesson 3.
Great, yeah. So again, with these lessons that we're highlighting and kind of talking through, there's a lot more within the curriculum itself, which you all have access to this PDF. Like in lesson 2, we threw the greenhouse effect video in there. It's actually a game that students can play, and it's a good like physical one where you can get outside and stuff. So knowing that obviously can't be virtual, but showing like the concepts can be. And then when you eventually are able to get back in the classroom, knowing that there's a lot of interactive activities within this curriculum as well. So with lesson 3, this one actually is really good for virtual and there's no really adaptation needed. This lesson's asking the question, what are the repercussions of the rise in global temperature? So again, looking at the indicators or the impacts that we're experiencing. So I wanted to throw a question out to you all again. And if you want to just put it in the chat box itself, but thinking of impacts of climate change that you personally have witnessed. If you guys could throw in some impacts you've witnessed in the chat box, and Sarah can monitor those. So I see some really intense heat in the summers, sea level rising and flooding if you're on the coast, shoreline eroding, higher temps, more precipitation. I think we're seeing that really across the country. Not as many cold days in the winter. Flooding in areas that weren't previously flood zones in Louisiana. It's getting really wet in the Midwest. Spring's coming much earlier in the Swiss Alps. Spring birds arriving earlier in the north and some species not even migrating. Extremely fluctuating weather on a daily or weekly basis, right? So kind of like global weirding, a lot of people say. Yeah. So this we find is a really good question to ask people of all ages and really posing it to your students for them to start thinking about, even if they have, they're in middle school and their lifetimes are short, they are still eyewitnesses to climate change. We all are eyewitnesses right now. So helping them kind of understand what to look for and what it means when they're seeing these things happening and how that kind of contributes to, these multiple lines of evidence and the bigger picture itself. But with lesson 3, one of the resources is the National Climate Assessment. So if you aren't familiar, the National Climate Assessment is a really great resource that is updated every 4 years. And it's a print version as well as an online resource that you can go to see the impacts of climate change all across the nation. So it divides it into regions of the world, impacts that people are seeing. It has photos and maps. So yeah, all of those are there for you to kind of play around with, and lesson 3 can walk you through some of those. So check it out.
Awesome. Thanks, Megan.
Mm-hmm.
Are we ready to go on to lesson 4?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So in lesson 4, our question is, what would you need to monitor the repercussions of the rise in global temperature? So in lesson 3, we talked about what are the repercussions. Now we need to figure out how we're monitoring those things. And in this lesson, we talk about 2 different ways. One, we can learn about what scientists do to monitor that, those repercussions, but then also we can become citizen science or participatory scientists ourselves. And so we're not going to go too deeply into this right now, but there's a lot of great resources online that have scientists talking about their work in climate change research. I have linked a video here for you. But also in the Next Generation Climate Worksheets tab, which I'm going to navigate to, we have written biographies of scientists. It's called Scientist Stories. I'll click on it here to show you. So we have an image and then a brief description of what the scientist does. And I think there might be 10 maybe. And we have a worksheet that's associated with that that you could give your students to help them reflect. So it might be, Scientists in Action worksheet is what it's called. I'll show you that as well. So it just prompts students to reflect on those bios. And I think you could tailor this to work with a video as well if you wanted to do that instead. So I'll go ahead and close those. We also want students to engage in science themselves, and it's actually maybe easier now that they might be at home, depending on the context in which they're working and living. But a lot of citizen science can be done in a park, in a backyard, even out a window quite easily. And finding these participatory science opportunities online can be really easy to do as well. So there's an organization called SciStarter, and I'm going to put that in the chat. I think it's scistarter.com, and they're an organization that puts together all types of scientific opportunities for non-scientists, which is great. And also one of the resources on the worksheets tab is a citizen science slideshow, and I'll just navigate to that real quick to show you. This would be a great resource for you as an educator to go through and, oops, let's see if I can get it to open.
You can click on the PDF too. Oh, there you go.
Okay, to go through and to see some different opportunities. So Nature's Notebook, Cornell Lab of Ornithology has a lot of opportunities, and stream monitoring as well. And I have one more thing to show you on that. There is an opportunity right now from CocoRAS, which I actually don't know what the acronym exactly stands for. It's super long, but they're looking for rain gauge monitors right now. So you just go out and you measure how much rain is coming to your area, and you can put it in on a web page. And Minnesota is specifically calling for volunteers now. And if you wanted to engage in this as a class, typically what I would suggest is the educator makes the, is the facilitator, in the sense of they're the one that signs up for the specific engagement with the website, and then you facilitate the collection of data with your class and then submit those reports to the website themselves. It's a little easier than having students, especially young students, do that themselves. So if you have any favorite citizen science projects or other participatory projects for students, we'd like to hear about them. You can put them in the chat. I know I really like Backyard Bird Count is really fun. And there's even some like on iNaturalist and Seek. I'll put both of those. And they use actually electronic engagement. So through an iPhone app or something like that. Great. Cool. ICChange.org from Betsy. Awesome. So as we transition kind of to the last lessons, we know that you have experience doing this distance learning adaptation now, and we want to hear about what's working and what's super challenging for you, you know, especially as people are just having all kinds of different experiences with how the administration is supporting them, or what needs their students have that's very different. So we'd like to hear about those. This is definitely not going to be enough space for everyone. I'll try to add some more maybe here, bullet points as we go. And you can just double click on the bullet points. What doesn't work is using a large font for a small bullet point. Yeah, how it works. Students being able to work on their own schedules or time frames. I sat in on a youth conversation last night, and one of the students talked about how he can choose to do homework on rainy days and go outside on sunny days. And I thought that was so great. Google Forms works for doing formative assessments for students. Yeah, challenges are emotional stress for students. Double-edged sword of providing structure, but not students not having enough self-discipline maybe to stay organized, or even the skills that they need to do online ed. And challenging for parents, yeah, definitely. Some people like Google Classroom. I don't know if you guys have heard of, in terms of assessments, I've heard about this thing called Chalk. I think it's Chalk Talks. Let's put it in. Basically, a way to do reading comprehension quizzes as students are reading a text. Should be similar to Google Forms. Awesome. We encourage you to keep filling this out as we move along. I'm going to go over to lesson 5 really quickly. So in lesson 5, our question is, in what ways can the repercussions of climate change be minimized? So we know the repercussions, we know how to monitor them, and we are monitoring them. And then we want to talk about, what are we going to do about these things, and what language do we need to talk about these solutions? And so some terms that are used in conversations about climate change solutions include impacts, adaptation, and mitigation, which are really big words and can be really complex depending on the certain context in which you're talking about them. So this activity, well, we have multiple activities for this to help students understand these concepts and start thinking about examples in their everyday lives. So there's a video that I've linked there that's actually a cartoon. It's 3 minutes, about, I think it's a cartoon. Either way, it's a short video that has definitions for these things. And then we also have a longer 20-minute video if you wanted to watch that to help these definitions. I don't think Sarah has access to that, so I'll put it in the chat. And in our worksheets tab for lesson 5, we want to navigate there. We have different activities. So we have a worksheet that has adaptation and mitigation scenarios, and we have evidence and reasoning worksheet as well. But one thing I wanted to show you was the mitigation and adaptation prompt lines worksheet and the associated Venn diagram worksheet. So prompt lines, these are just scenarios that can be categorized as an adaptation, a mitigation, or actually both. And you can do this asynchronously or synchronously, I think. And I'll show you how we created an interactive doc that can do that, where you can use this as a synchronous activity. So on slide 29, we've created a Venn diagram. And in the left-hand corner, I just have some prompts here. So I'll just quickly give you a definition of what a mitigation and adaptation is. So mitigation is just an act that reduces greenhouse gas emissions, and an adaptation is an act or an event that reduces harm from those things or from climate change. And then both would be an act that does both of those things. So as I read a prompt in the chat, I want you to say, is it a mitigation, is it an adaptation, or is it both? So our first prompt is, the city of Portland, Oregon expands the transit system. it's going to be hard because we didn't have much time to think about this. But so some people say mitigation. Betsy says B for both. Anyone else want to weigh in? Yeah, so what we could do in this case is you can actually drag these over. They're just text boxes and you can put them in what you think. So I'm going to put them in here in both. It could, you know, expanding the transit system could reduce the number of individual cars on the road, so it reduces greenhouse emissions, but in also some contexts could reduce harm in the sense as well. But I don't know if it's a direct act to reduce harm. So yeah, some people are moving these over for what they believe as well. You can do that. I won't spend too much more time on this since I want to respect everyone's time. So the actual worksheet for this Venn diagram is also on the worksheets tab in our resources. So I'm just going to shoot it over to Megan now to talk about our last lesson.
Awesome. Yeah, so lesson 6 in this curriculum and in the rest of our Curricula Suite ends with solutions, because we know that in climate change education, it's very important to give that hope and that self-efficacy that you can actually do something about it. We know that it's very overwhelming, and especially at a time where we're dealing with another global crisis like this pandemic. Breaking it down, making students and youth and people feel like it is more manageable and that they can actually take action. So with lesson 6, just like the rest of this curriculum, supports NGSS. So this solution is using engineering design practices to support the standards. So it actually walks students through steps to create a project that would help minimize the effects of climate change. If you're interested, actually a week from today, April 15th, we have a webinar to help give ideas about how you can actually take action at home right now in the case of COVID-19. So we have a youth program at Climate Generation, and they are really good at thinking of action projects, acting on climate change, doing advocacy work. So that's what they're going to chat about, things that you can do right now in the day and age that we are in. So there's a link there. Otherwise, all the events can be found on our website as well, and we can send a follow-up email with that. But I just wanted to kind of give a poll question as well. We've come to the end of the curriculum here. We know it was pretty quick, but we wanted to just give a few ideas of ways to facilitate things that are actually interactive, and then just like kind of show that they're the highlights of the other activities in the lessons as well. I really appreciate everyone really jumping in and interacting and writing in the slides. It seemed to work pretty well. So we hope that you got some new ideas as well with these templates, and just ways that you can ask questions that are more interactive than something maybe that you hadn't thought of before. So one last interactive question I wanted to give to you all. Within Zoom, you're actually able to put up polls. So Sarah, if you want to launch the poll right now, we have a question for you all. And the question is, what type of support do you want from us moving forward? So if you want to launch the poll, and then go ahead and click on your answer to this question. And I think you can click on more than one if you feel like you want to. So we'll give you about a minute here.
I can see it, Sarah, and I can see people.
So some of the answers are, if you wanted more webinars, sharing digital resources, interactive meetings to show how to adapt curricula. So currently we are in a webinar as it's known in Zoom, but you can see that we were actually able to do a lot of interaction. A meeting would be us actually able to see your faces and hear you and chat. So that helps, or is more helpful with smaller groups than the group that we have today, but it's possible. And then, yeah, more opportunities just to connect with fellow educators. So Looks like more webinars, sharing digital resources, kind of the top one. Awesome. You can end the poll. And those are the results. So you all should be able to see that as well, what other people voted on. So that's just another way to interact. Great. Well, thinking about future opportunities then at Climate Generation, knowing that all of our curriculum, including NGC up here, is free to download off our website. So go ahead, check out our resources, download them, take a look and see if you can use them. We also have our Teach Climate Network, which is a network that is educators from across the country and the world. So like folks who have joined with us today, this is an actual face-to-face virtual meeting where we talk about different themes and books. And I saw a few folks who are on the webinar today who join us in these Teach Climate Network meetings. So feel free to join us then. It's a good time. The next one is going to be Monday, April 27th in the evening. So again, we'll send out a link to that and you can check our website. We also have the Summer Institute. That's our annual professional development workshop coming up this summer. We're figuring out if it's going to be virtual or in person, obviously because of the situation we are in. So stay tuned for that, but check it out. We have scholarships available to attend that. And then another event coming up in April, we have on Earth Day, a really awesome lineup of musicians and scientists and speakers and storytellers. So check out this 50th anniversary celebration of Earth Day at 11 a.m. Central Standard Time on Wednesday, April 22nd. So those are just a few ways to engage further. Stay tuned for more webinars about our resources from us. And then I think we'll take some questions now. Sarah was monitoring the chat as they came through, so we can take a look at that. Otherwise, if you folks don't have questions, feel free to hop off. We know it's 1 o'clock right now. It's been an hour, so we just thank you so much for joining us and hope this was helpful.
Yeah, thank you. I'm also happy to stay for a few and answer questions that come up. Oh, thanks, Sarah, if you added them to the bottom of the script.
Oh, let's see.
Awesome. Thanks, Susan. Yeah, so again, about just making sure that we have updated curriculum, we'll send a follow-up email that will include a link to the recording for this on our YouTube page. We'll also send all updated links for all the resources that we've included here.
I did see one specific question about our word choices of using like repercussions rather than impacts, or greenhouse gases rather than heat trapping gases. Those really just came from the next generation science standards and what students need to learn according to the standards. So those questions and that vocabulary came directly from that, so we know that it supports NGSS. But knowing that they're very interchangeable, so whatever you feel comfortable using.
Yeah. Nadia asked, are interactive activities more feasible? I get that, and I think what you're saying here is comparing to like worksheets or printed graphs rather than simulations or virtual media. And our goal here today to present printed materials plus virtual materials was to create a sense of equity in terms of recognizing that not all students have access to good Wi-Fi, and they don't have access to the proper devices to access things on the internet. So we hope that if they can't access those things, they can get printed resources somehow.
There's another question or a few about, saying that we are all eyewitnesses to climate change now, no matter what age we are. And I think a big thing is studying phenology with climate change, within climate change education. So you're having students really monitor and observe their environment. That's like the most basic thing that we can ask. then once they have that figured out, we're like, oh, I expect, this bird to lay eggs at this point in the year. And then when you see these, evidence for phenology happening at different times, that's when the conversation about climate change can happen. That can come from historical records of the place. It can come from journals from people. It can come from data and come from graphs. So it's the student observations, but then comparing it to things that happened previously. So it's kind of like a multi-level way to understand things at a younger age, but still very possible.
Great. Here's another question just about technical capabilities. So Angela asked, can you use Google Slides without changing them? And I'm not sure exactly the context, but today what we did is I shared my screen through Zoom, and I left the Google Docs and my browser in an editable form. I didn't put it in presentation mode. So generally, if you didn't want your audience to be engaging in the way that we had today and you don't want them to edit it, you just put it in presenter mode and you don't share the slides. Alternatively, you can share the slides as view mode rather than just edit mode. So you just want to look at the options in Google Docs and Google Slides about what are the capabilities you want to give to people who can access those documents.
Yeah, I think that probably covers it most. Feel free to send us an email with further questions. Our emails are up there on the last slide. It's just our first name at climategen.org. And we will send out a final email to folks who attended this webinar with all the links and the slides again, so you can get the information that way.
Awesome. Sarah, did you think there was anything that you noticed that we didn't touch on before we head out? Awesome. Well, thanks everyone. We really appreciate it. And we appreciate all your hard work, and you guys are inspiring. Yeah. Thanks.
Cool. Thanks all.
See ya.